That was exactly what my aunt said the morning after my grandmother's funeral, holding up the old wooden sewing kit like it was something she'd found at the bottom of a dumpster. 43 years. That's how long my grandmother kept that box on the shelf above her workbench in the back room of her antique shop. 43 years of hand-stitched quilts and whispered lessons and Saturday mornings that smelled like cedar and cinnamon tea. And Aunt Diane picked it up with 2 fingers, like touching it too long might infect her with something, and dropped it straight into the trash bag without a second look. I didn't say a word. I was standing by the door with a mop in my hands, the same way I'd spent most of my life in that shop, useful enough to keep around, invisible enough to ignore. My aunt had a gift for that. She could look directly at me and see right through me, like I was a smudge on a window pane that hadn't quite earned the effort of being wiped clean. I waited until she and my cousin Marcus left to take measurements in the front showroom, then I pulled the sewing kit out of the bag. The latch on the left side had always stuck. I'd watched my grandmother work it 100 times, press and slide, not lift. The lid opened with the small exhale of something that had been holding its breath for a long time. The top tray held the usual things. Spools of thread, a bone folder, a pair of silver scissors I remembered from childhood. But I already knew about the false bottom. My grandmother had shown it to me 11 years ago, on my 17th birthday, with her hand over mine and her voice low. "Not yet," she had said. "But someday you will need to know this is here." I pressed the panel. It gave. Inside was a white envelope sealed with a strip of clear tape that had gone yellow at the edges, and beneath it, folded into quarters, a document printed on heavy legal paper with a notary stamp in the lower right corner. I read the first 3 lines. Then I read them again. It was my grandmother's last will and testament. Dated 14 months ago. Signed, witnessed, and registered with the county clerk's office. It left the antique shop, the building, the inventory, and the parcel of land beneath all of it entirely to me. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I had expected to feel something that moved fast, relief or fear, or the particular dizziness that comes from a floor shifting under your feet. Instead, what I felt was slow and still and very, very cold, because I understood immediately what this meant. The deed Aunt Diane had shown the estate attorney 2 days ago, the one that listed her as the sole inheritor of the property. It was either a fraud or a forgery, and she had been walking around the shop for 4 days already believing she owned it. I stood in that back room for a long time, listening to Marcus calling out measurements to her in the front. 1,200 square feet on the ground floor. Good bones. Developer would love this. I folded the will carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I picked up the sewing kit, carried it to my car during my lunch break, and locked it in the trunk. When I walked back inside, I picked up my mop. Aunt Diane didn't even glance at me. I want you to understand why I didn't walk to the phone right then and call a lawyer with my aunt standing 10 feet away. Because if you've ever been underestimated your whole life, you already know. The moment I showed that document, it would stop being evidence and start being a dispute. She would say it was forged. She would say my grandmother wasn't in her right mind. She had the money for attorneys, and I had a savings account I'd built working part-time in that same shop for $12 an hour. In civil court, patience isn't a virtue. It's a disadvantage. You run out of money before you run out of being right. But if she tried to sell the building or use it as collateral, or sign any contract based on a deed she had no legal right to hold, that wasn't a family argument anymore. That was wire fraud. That was bank fraud. That was a federal crime, and federal crimes don't get settled in probate court over 18 months while attorneys bill by the hour. I needed her to make a move. So I let her. That evening, I called Mr. Calloway. He was 71 years old, semi-retired, and had drafted my grandmother's will himself. He answered on the second ring because he'd been waiting for me to call. He said, "I've been watching the estate filing. The deed she submitted is not the one I witnessed." I said, "I know. I found the real one." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then we wait. And we watch. And Claire, don't tell her anything." I said, I wasn't going to. The next 11 days, I showed up to work at the shop as usual. My aunt had decided to keep it open temporarily while the estate was being processed, because the revenue looked better on paper for the bank appraisal she was apparently planning. I dusted shelves. I helped customers. I printed receipts. I was so deeply, thoroughly unremarkable that 3 times I heard Aunt Diane introduce me to visitors as the girl who runs the register. Not my niece. Not Claire. The girl who runs the register. My grandmother used to say that the strongest seams in a quilt are the ones underneath, the ones you can't see from the front. She meant that the work that holds everything together is usually invisible. I thought about that a lot during those 11 days. On day 9, I was reorganizing the storage room when I heard Marcus on the phone in the office. He was talking fast, low, with the kind of energy that comes from believing you're about to get away with something. A commercial bridge loan. $800,000, secured against the building. The developer's offer was cash on close, but the title search was taking too long and they needed liquidity now. Someone Marcus knew had a private lender who moved fast and didn't ask too many questions as long as the deed was clean and the notary was on site. High interest, short term, paid off the moment the sale closed. I moved a box of vintage silverware very slowly from one shelf to another and kept my breathing even. Marcus said. She has no idea. She's been mopping floors here for 10 years. She thinks she's going to get a sentimental keepsake and a thank you card. He laughed. The sound of it settled somewhere behind my sternum like a stone going to the bottom of still water. I went to the back room during my break, typed a text to Mr. Calloway. They're taking out a loan. Private lender. This week. And then I went back out front and helped a woman find a pair of Depression-era glass candlesticks for her dining table. The loan signing was scheduled for Thursday at 11 in the morning, in the shop's back office. Wednesday evening, I drove 40 minutes to a clinic on the other side of the county and sat across from a forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Okafor for 2 hours. I answered every question she asked, slowly and completely. I had called her 6 days earlier, as soon as I understood what my aunt and Marcus were planning, because my grandmother's will contained a clause I had read 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Any challenge to a beneficiary's mental competency must be answered with a current evaluation by a certified clinician. My grandmother had added it herself. Mr. Calloway said she had insisted on it. She was always 3 moves ahead. Thursday morning, I wore my work apron and arrived 20 minutes early. The private lender's representative was a man named Gordon, compact and well-dressed, with a briefcase that looked deliberately expensive. He brought a notary, a young woman with reading glasses and a rolling cart full of folders. They set up in the office, spreading documents across my grandmother's oak desk. The same desk where she used to teach me to identify silver hallmarks under a magnifying glass. My aunt was already dressed like the building was hers. New blazer, hair blown out, the particular energy of someone who has been rehearsing this moment for days. I came in with coffee. I set it on the sideboard without making eye contact with anyone. Gordon explained the terms efficiently. The loan would be collateralized against the building. The fund's $800,000, wired directly, would release the moment the deed of trust was signed and notarized. The interest rate was aggressive, but with the developer's sale expected to close in 30 days, Aunt Diane would clear enough to pay off the loan and pocket a significant remainder. A bridge, not a burden. Marcus leaned over the desk. How fast does the wire go through? Gordon said, minutes. My aunt exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for a year. I poured the coffee slowly. I needed to be there for the moment the pen touched the paper. I needed it to be unambiguous. Gordon slid the documents forward. Sign here, initial here, and here at the bottom of page 6. My aunt picked up the pen. She did not hesitate. She did not look at the framed photograph of my grandmother on the wall behind the desk. She pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name. Diane Parrish. Owner. She signed the loan application. She signed the deed of trust. She signed the affidavit of ownership, which stated under penalty of perjury that she was the sole legal owner of the property, that the title was clear of competing claims, and that she had full authority to encumber the asset. The notary stamped each document with the kind of solid, irreversible sound that courtrooms are made of. Initiating the transfer now, Gordon said, opening his laptop. Marcus said, I told you this would work. Aunt Diane looked up, and for the first time in 11 days, she actually looked at me. Maybe it was the way I was standing. Maybe it was the stillness. She frowned slightly, the way you frown when something in a room has changed and you can't identify what. Claire, she said, and her voice had a new edge in it. You can go home. We won't need you this afternoon. I said, actually, I think I'll stay. She opened her mouth. The chime from Gordon's laptop cut through the room. He turned the screen to show her. Wire confirmed. $800,000. Transferred to the account of Diane Parrish. My aunt made a sound I had never heard from her before. Half triumph, half relief, all greed. She grabbed Marcus's arm and he said something about celebrating tonight, already reaching for his phone. I reached into the pocket of my apron. Aunt Diane, I said. The money is in your account. You just used the building as collateral for a federal loan. You want to confirm that? On the record? She turned and looked at me the way she always had. Like I was background noise that had gotten briefly, inconveniently loud. The money is mine. The building is mine. You can clean up in here and then you can leave. I held up my phone. Did you get that, Mr. Calloway? His voice came through clear and steady. Every word, Claire. Step to the side. The front door of the shop didn't open. It came off the bell mount entirely. 4 agents in FBI windbreakers moved through the showroom with the kind of coordinated, unhurried certainty that makes a room go very quiet very fast. Behind them came the district attorney and Mr. Calloway, who walked in carrying a leather folder under his arm like a man who had been waiting for this particular Thursday for a long time. Federal agents, the lead officer said. Step away from the desk. Do not touch the documents. My aunt's coffee cup hit the floor. The sound was surprisingly small, Gordon stood up very fast and pointed at the agents and then at my aunt and said, "She told me the title was clean. I have all the correspondence. I have emails. I am not part of this." He was already pulling his laptop out and turning it toward them before anyone asked him to. "You'll have a chance to explain," the agent said, taking the laptop. Marcus moved toward the back door. An agent was already standing in front of it. "What is this?" my aunt said. Her voice had gone strange. Flat. Like something behind it had broken. "Who are you people? This is my mother's shop. You cannot come in here." "It's not your shop," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the white envelope. I opened it, removed the will, and placed it on the desk in front of the lead agent. "This is my grandmother's last will and testament. Notarized, witnessed, registered with the county clerk 14 months ago. It names me as the sole beneficiary of this property." The deed my aunt submitted to the estate was a forgery. She just used a building she has no legal claim to in order to secure a federally regulated wire transfer. That is bank fraud. That is wire fraud. I looked at my aunt, and the affidavit of ownership she just signed under oath is perjury. The agent read the first page. Then he looked at Gordon, who had gone the particular color of someone running a rapid private inventory of every decision they had made in the last 2 weeks. "Is this the property you evaluated?" the agent asked him. Gordon said. She provided documents. I verified the notary seals. I had no reason to. "You'll want an attorney," the agent said, not unkindly. An agent stepped toward my aunt. She jerked back, her shoulder hitting the shelf behind her, and a row of vintage apothecary bottles shuddered. "Don't touch me," she said. "I am Mabel Whitmore's daughter. This property belongs to me by right of blood if nothing else. That girl has been unstable for years. You don't understand what she's like, what she's capable of." "Diane Parrish," the agent said evenly, taking her arm and turning her with a practiced movement that left no room for argument. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and making a false statement to a federally insured institution." The handcuffs made a small sound. Clean. Final. Better than any argument I'd been storing up for 11 days. My aunt looked at me from across my grandmother's desk. The recognition in her face was the kind that only arrives too late the moment you realize the furniture you've been ignoring for 30 years was actually watching everything. "You planned this," she said. "You handed me the sewing kit when you threw it away," I said. "I just didn't drop it." That was when Marcus spoke. His voice was calm. That was the first thing that frightened me. He wasn't panicking like his mother. He was pulling something from his briefcase with the deliberate motion of someone executing a plan they had prepared for. He set a document on the desk. Then he straightened his jacket. "Officer," he said. "Before you go any further, I need you to look at that." The lead agent picked it up. He read for a moment. His expression did not change exactly, but something in it recalibrated. "This is an emergency petition for mental health evaluation," he said. "Filed this morning. Petitioner is," he glanced up, "Marcus Parrish. Subject is Claire Whitmore." The room temperature dropped. Marcus had prepared a voice for this moment, measured and full of practiced sorrow. "My cousin has a documented history of delusional episodes. She fixates on family members. She has accused multiple people of wrongdoing that never occurred." He slid a second paper forward. "That is a signed clinical letter from her treating therapist, Dr. Renner, confirming a pattern of paranoid ideation and evidence fabrication. Given the severity of her claims today, FBI agents, a forged will. This is exactly the kind of escalation we were warned about. She needs help, not a platform." He turned to me with an expression of such precise counterfeit concern that I almost admired it. "Claire, no one is angry with you. We know you loved Grandma. We know this is hard. But this isn't the way." The agent looked from the petition to me, and then to Mr. Calloway. I watched the hesitation move across the room like weather. A judge's signature on a mental health petition carried real procedural weight. If I was deemed incompetent, my testimony was voidable. The will I'd produced could be challenged as something I'd fabricated. The arrest could stall while the petition worked through the courts, and in the meantime, the loan documents were already signed and notarized. For a moment, nobody moved. My aunt stopped pulling against the agent's grip and stood very still, watching. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat. "May I?" He stepped forward and took the petition from the agent's hand. He read it the way a man reads something he expected to find. "Dr. Renner. Is that the Dr. Patricia Renner who surrendered her clinical license in Ohio 2 years ago following a board investigation into falsified patient records?" Marcus blinked. "Because that is the name and credentials on this letter." Mr. Calloway set it down. "And a letter from an unlicensed practitioner does not constitute clinical documentation under state statutes. Which means this petition, filed this morning on the basis of that letter, was obtained through fraudulent representation to a family court judge." He paused. "That is perjury. That is obstruction of a federal investigation." He opened his leather folder and placed a second document on the desk. "Clean, official, dated yesterday. This is a full forensic psychiatric evaluation of Claire Whitmore, conducted yesterday afternoon by Dr. Sandra Okafor, Chief Clinician for the County Psychiatric Services Office. Her finding: sound mind, intact judgment, no indicators of delusional disorder. He looked at Marcus. Your grandmother was a careful woman. Her will contains a competency clause. Any challenge to a beneficiary's mental capacity must be substantiated by a current, certified evaluation. We have one. Yours is signed by a woman who cannot legally sign anything. Marcus's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The agent looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone closing a door. Sir, did you file a false document to obtain a court order and obstruct an active federal investigation? I didn't. The doctor told me the letter was I was protecting my mother. Turn around. You cannot do this. I'm the one trying to help her. She's the one who. Turn around, sir. The second set of handcuffs made the same small, clean sound as the first. They walked Marcus out beside his mother, through the showroom, past the Depression-era glass and the silver candlesticks and the long oak countertop where my grandmother had spent 40 years telling people stories about where things came from and what they were worth. I stood at the office doorway and watched them go. My aunt stopped at the entrance to the showroom and turned back to look at me one last time. She didn't say anything. That was what I will remember longest, not the words she threw at me across my grandmother's desk, but the silence at the end, when there was nothing left to say and she finally understood that. I exhaled. The air in the shop smelled the same as it always had. Cedar and old paper and something faintly floral that I had never been able to identify and had stopped trying to. It just smelled like the shop. It smelled like every Saturday morning of my entire childhood. I walked over to the window and stood in the light for a long time. The months that followed were not simple, but they were clean. The loan was voided the same day the federal indictment was filed. You cannot enforce a contract against collateral that was fraudulently represented, and institutions with any interest in staying federally insured do not try. Gordon cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. He had been negligent, not criminal, and the distinction mattered. The title came back to me without a fight, because the will was already registered. The county had it on file the whole time. All anyone had needed to do was look. I kept the shop open. That was the decision people seemed to expect me to labor over, and I didn't. My grandmother built that place with 40 years of her own hands and an eye for things other people overlooked. Selling it to a developer to become 11 condominiums with exposed brick and a rooftop terrace would have been the easiest version of winning, and she had not spent 40 years teaching me to take the easy version of anything. I repainted the back room. I had the floors refinished, the ones that had gone soft near the windows. I hired 2 people who knew what they were doing with antique furniture and silver and the particular patience required for both. Business is slower than fast, the way good things usually are. On the shelf above the workbench where my grandmother used to sit, I put the sewing kit back. The latch still sticks on the left side. You have to press and slide, not lift. I showed my new assistant how to work it on her first week, the same way my grandmother showed me, with one hand over hers. The envelope is gone, of course. The will is filed. The deed is clean. The false bottom is empty now except for a note I left myself, folded into quarters, that says only what my grandmother used to say when a quilt was nearly finished and you were tired and tempted to rush the last seams. The work underneath is what holds. My phone rings sometimes from a number I don't recognize, which usually means it's a call from county. I don't answer it. My aunt has called twice through a third party to ask about the inventory she says she left behind. Marcus sent a letter through an attorney that mostly said nothing in careful legal language. I have a folder for those things. I file them, and I move on. There is a quilt on the wall of the showroom now, the last one my grandmother finished before she got sick. I didn't display it for the first 3 months. I wasn't sure it was something I wanted people to handle with their eyes, the way strangers do when something is beautiful and available and they don't understand what it cost. But I put it up eventually, because she made it to be seen, and keeping it in the back room out of sentiment would have been its own kind of wastefulness. People stop in front of it. They ask how old it is, who made it, whether it's for sale. It's not for sale, I tell them. But I can tell you about it if you'd like. And then I do. If you've ever been told to make yourself small in a place that was supposed to be yours, share this story. And if you've ever had someone underestimate your patience, I want to know. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every single one.